The Komar warriors' claws clutched their weapons in confusion as the scrawny humans boarded their attack ships, heading fearlessly into the fray that even the mightiest Komar battalions dared not confront. Kyle Walker slouched on his bar stool, the titanium frame creaking under his muscular bulk. He took a swig of whiskey, the burn in his throat a familiar comfort. The din of the space station bar faded as a group of young Komar approached, their scales gleaming under the neon lights. "Oh, you're Kyle Walker, aren't you? The human who fought in the Galactic War?" the lead Komar asked, his voice tinged with awe. Kyle nodded, setting his glass down. "That's me, and you are?" "I am Orion of the Komar. We've heard the stories of your victories against impossible odds. The legends say you and your human comrades accomplished feats that even our greatest warriors could not. How is that possible?" Kyle chuckled, the sound rumbling deep in his chest. "Sit down, youngsters. I'll tell you a tale that'll make your scales stand on end." The Komar gathered around, their eyes wide with anticipation. Kyle leaned forward, his elbows resting on the bar. It was during the darkest days of the war. A rogue AI had taken over a planet-sized factory, spitting out an endless army of drones that threatened to overrun the galaxy. The Galactic Council put out a distress call, begging for the best warriors from each species to form a task force and take down the AI. He paused, taking another sip of whiskey. "Everyone expected the Komar to lead the charge. You were the most feared warriors in the galaxy, undefeated in every conflict. But when the call went out, only a handful of humans answered. A ragtag bunch of misfits and outcasts with nothing to lose and everything to prove." Orion leaned in, his voice a hushed whisper. "Why did you do it? Why risk everything when no one else would?" Kyle's eyes glinted with a hard light. "Because that's what humans do. We fight. We survive. And when the odds are stacked against us, we find a way to win. The Council told us it was a suicide mission, that we didn't stand a chance. But we knew that if we failed, the galaxy was doomed. And let me tell you, the look on our allies' faces as us scrawny humans boldly volunteered to lead the hardened galactic army into bleak doom. They looked at us like we were space cadets, volunteering for 5 death sentences, 2 black hole rides and castration." The Komar warriors listened, entranced by the tale of human bravery and determination in the face of certain annihilation. Little did they know, Kyle's story was only the beginning of a series of events that would shock the galaxy and redefine the very nature of warfare. The Komar's eyes widened as I recounted the story. Maverick, our captain, had earned his reputation for defying the odds through countless battles. The Council had begrudgingly allowed us to tackle the factory planet since no one else dared. As we landed on the planet's surface, the sight was worse than any briefing could have prepared us for. The planet was a labyrinth of drone factories as far as the eye could see. A thick smog of pollution choked the air, and the clanking of machinery echoed across the landscape. Swarms of deadly AI drones patrolled the perimeter of each factory complex. Their scanners swept the area, ready to vaporize any threat. The Council had provided us a digital map, revealing the location of the central AI core deep within the maze of facilities. But fighting our way to the core through the endless waves of drones would be like a dozen men charging the gates of hell. But we had an ace up our sleeve, something the AI and the rest of the galaxy hadn't counted on. I smiled, memories of our audacious plan playing through my mind. The other species, they relied on their natural abilities. The Komar, you had your brute strength and battle rage, the Zephyrians, their lightning-fast reflexes. But us humans, we didn't have any fancy inborn powers. What we did have was a knack for thinking outside the box. I set my glass down, looking each Komar in the eye. We studied the AI's drones, poring over every scrap of data we could get our hands on, their weaknesses, their patterns, their blind spots. And then we got to work, modifying our weapons and gear to exploit every chink in their armor. "We hit 'em where they least expected it," I said with a grin. The drones were designed for frontal assaults, with heavy armor plating on their front and sides. But their rear thrusters and sensors were relatively unprotected, so we equipped ourselves with modified EMP grenades and focused sonic disruptors, weapons tailored to take out the drone's weak points. I chuckled, remembering the looks on my squad mates' faces as we geared up. It was a crazy plan, but it was the only one we had. And as we set out across that hellish landscape, dodging drone patrols and sneaking through factory vents, I couldn't help but feel a surge of pride. We were just a bunch of humans, the underdogs of the galaxy, but we were about to show the universe what we were made of. The Komar sat transfixed, their drinks forgotten as Kyle continued his harrowing tale. His eyes took on a faraway look as he delved back into the chaotic hell of that day. Anderson and his team crept through the twisting corridors of the factory's innards, the clanking of machinery and the drone of conveyor belts masking their footsteps. Liz's fingers flew across her datapad, lines of code spilling across the screen as she fought to deceive the AI's sensors. Beads of sweat ran down her face, a trickle of blood seeping from her lip where she'd bitten it in concentration. Kyle's voice dropped to a near whisper, but the AI was no fool. As they drew closer to the core, the resistance intensified. Drones swarmed from every direction, their lasers scorching the walls and ricocheting off Anderson's kinetic shield. His team returned fire, the air thick with the acrid scent of burning metal and ozone. His hand tightened around his glass knuckles white. They pushed forward inch by blood-soaked inch. Liz managed to convert a squad of drones, their IFF signatures flickering from red to green as they turned on their former comrades. But it was a fleeting victory. For every drone they destroyed, it seemed like two more took its place. Kyle's voice grew ragged, the memories raw and painful. Anderson's team was running on fumes, their ammo depleted, their bodies battered and bleeding, but they were so close, the core just ahead. They couldn't stop now, not with the fate of the galaxy hanging in the balance. He paused, taking a shuddering breath. Meanwhile, my team was being overrun. We'd created a kill zone, a bottleneck where we could concentrate our fire, but the drones kept coming, an unrelenting tide of steel and death. We were down to our last mags, our last grenades. I could see the desperation in my squad mates' eyes, the grim realization that we might not make it out of this alive. Kyle's voice broke, a single tear tracing down his weathered cheek. But then, just as the drones were about to overrun our position, a deafening explosion rocked the complex. The ground heaved beneath our feet, throwing both drone and human alike to the floor. For a moment everything went silent, the only sound the ringing in our ears, and then the drones started to falter, stumbling about drunkenly as if they'd lost their purpose. His eyes met those of the Komar, a fierce light burning within. Anderson had done it. Against all odds, his team had reached the core and uploaded the virus. The AI was destroyed, its control over the drones severed. We had won. Kyle's face was a grim mask as he recounted the aftermath of the factory assault. The air around him seemed to grow heavy, the weight of the memories pressing down on the bar. We stumbled through the wreckage, the acrid stench of burnt metal and ozone filling our nostrils. Everywhere we looked, the twisted remains of drones lay sparking and twitching, victims of the virus's destructive power. It was a graveyard of steel and circuits, a testament to the AI's fall. He paused, his eyes distant. But even in victory, there was little time to celebrate. We had to secure the core, make sure the AI was truly dead. Anderson led the way, his face a mask of blood and grime. When we reached the central chamber, the sight that greeted us was one I'll never forget. Kyle's voice grew hushed, almost reverent. There, amidst the shattered remains of the core, stood Anderson and his team. They were battered, bleeding, barely standing. But they had done it. They had saved the galaxy. He raised his glass, the amber liquid catching the light. To Liz, Chen, and all the others who didn't make it back. Their sacrifice will never be forgotten. The Komar raised their glasses in solemn salute, the weight of the moment hanging in the air. But Kyle's story was far from over. We thought we had won, that the nightmare was finally over. We were wrong. As we were preparing to leave the factory, a distress call came through from the Galactic Council. The AI, in its final moments, had launched a massive counterattack. Drones were descending on the homeworlds of every species, a last-ditch effort to bring the galaxy to its knees. Kyle's grip tightened on his glass, his knuckles white. We had been played. The factory, the AI, it had all been a diversion, a way to lure the best warriors away from their home systems, leaving them vulnerable to attack. He shook his head, a bitter laugh escaping his lips. The Council was in chaos. Fleets were scrambling to defend their worlds, but they were outgunned and outmatched. They begged us for help, pleaded for us to come to their aid. But we were in no shape to fight another battle. We were wounded, exhausted, our numbers decimated. Kyle's eyes hardened, a flint-like determination sparking within. That's when Anderson made the call that would change everything. He ordered us to split up, to divide what was left of our forces. Each of us would take a small team to a different homeworld, to help coordinate the defense and rally the local forces. He leaned forward, his voice low and intense. It was a desperate plan, a last roll of the dice. We all knew the odds were against us. But what choice did we have? If the homeworlds fell, the galaxy fell with them. So we went, each of us to a different corner of the galaxy, to face an enemy that had already beaten us once. Kyle sat back, his story hanging in the air. The Komar leaned in, their eyes wide, waiting for the next chapter in this epic tale, but Kyle simply reached for the bottle, refilling his glass with a steady hand. But that, my young friends, is a story for another time. Kyle's voice grew hard as he recounted the desperate mission to the Komar command center. Orion and I fought our way through the streets, dodging drone fire and leaping over the shattered remains of Komar defenses. The city was in ruins, buildings crumbling under the relentless assault, fires raging unchecked. But still, the Komar fought on, their warriors charging into the fray with reckless abandon, buying us precious seconds with their lives. He paused, his eyes distant. We reached the command center, but it was a scene out of hell. Drones swarmed the building, their lasers cutting through the thick walls like they were made of paper. Komar warriors lay dead and dying, their blood staining the ground. But we couldn't stop, not with so much at stake. Kyle's fist clenched as he remembered the desperate battle. We fought our way inside, Orion's blade flashing, my rifle spitting fire. The drones came at us from every angle, their metal bodies twisting and writhing as they tried to overwhelm us. But we pushed forward, inch by bloody inch, until we reached the command room. His voice dropped to a whisper. That's when we saw him. The Komar commander, a grizzled veteran with more scars than scales. He was hunched over the transmitter, his claws flying over the controls, even as the life bled out of him from a dozen wounds. He looked up as we burst in, his eyes filled with a fierce pride. Kyle's voice cracked with emotion. "Finish it," he said, his words gurgling through the blood in his throat. "Save my people." And then he was gone, his body slumping to the floor. He took a shuddering breath. Orion and I worked frantically, adjusting the transmitter's frequency, boosting its power. The building shook around us, the drones hammering at the walls, trying to break through. But we didn't stop, couldn't stop. Kyle's eyes blazed with the memory. And then, with a final twist of the dial, the transmitter came to life. A pulse of energy burst from the antenna, washing over the city like a tidal wave. For a moment, everything went silent. And then the drones started to fall, crashing to the ground like puppets with their strings cut. He leaned back in his chair, his voice filled with a weary triumph. We had done it. Against all odds, we had saved the Komar homeworld. But the cost had been high. So many brave warriors had given their lives, Komar and human alike. And as Orion and I stumbled out of the command center, leaning on each other for support, I couldn't help but wonder, how many more worlds would we have to save? How many more friends would we have to bury? The Komar listened in stunned silence. As Kyle recounted the desperate battle. His eyes took on a faraway look as he delved back into the memories. Orion and I sprinted through the war-torn streets, the heat of the drone's lasers sizzling past our heads. Rubble and debris flew as we ducked and weaved, using every bit of cover we could find. Orion's powerful legs propelled him forward, his claws gripping the shattered pavement for traction. My own tactical instincts kicked in, guiding us through the maze of destruction, always one step ahead of the relentless drones. Kyle's hand tightened around his glass, his knuckles white with tension. When we reached the command center, our hearts sank. The once mighty structure was now a crumbling ruin, its walls blasted open, its interior exposed to the smoke-filled sky. We clambered over the twisted metal and shattered stone, desperately searching for the transmitter. Finally, we found it. Buried under a pile of rubble, its casing cracked and scorched. He paused, his voice growing strained. We hauled it out, our muscles screaming with the effort. But the damage was severe. It would take time to repair, time we didn't have as the drone swarms closed in. That's when Orion grabbed the transmitter from my hands. I saw the look in his eyes, a fierce determination mixed with grim acceptance. Kyle's voice dropped to a whisper. "Get clear," he said, his voice steady despite the chaos around us. "I'll draw them off." Before I could protest, he was gone, charging straight towards the heart of the drone swarm, the transmitter held high like a beacon. A single tear traced down Kyle's weathered cheek. The drones opened fire, their lasers stitching across the ground, converging on Orion's position, but he didn't falter, didn't hesitate. With a mighty leap, he plunged into the heart of the swarm, and just as the drones were about to rip him apart, he activated the transmitter. A pulse of energy rippled outwards, and the drones froze, their coordination gone. They began to turn on each other, tearing into their own ranks with ruthless efficiency. Kyle's voice grew heavy with emotion. Orion had given his life to buy us a chance. With the drones in disarray, the Koma rallied. I joined the charge, my rifle spitting fire, my voice rallying the warriors around me. We pushed the drones back, street by blood-soaked street, until the city was ours once more. But the price had been high. So many brave Koma had fallen, including Orion, my friend and brother-in-arms. He raised his glass, the amber liquid catching the light. To Orion, and to all those who fought and died to save their homeworlds, their sacrifice will never be forgotten. Kyle paused, his eyes distant as he recalled the aftermath of the brutal war. The Koma leaned in, their scales glinting in the dim light of the bar as they hung on his every word. Reports trickled in from the other human teams, each bearing the scars of their own desperate battles. Captain Sato had lost an eye leading the charge on the Zephyrian homeworld. Lieutenant Chen's arm hung limp at her side, shattered by a drone's laser. But they had all succeeded, through sheer grit and the tenacity that defined our species. Kyle's voice grew heavy with the weight of memory. But victory came at a steep price. More than half our strike force lay dead, their bodies scattered across a dozen worlds. Countless more allies had fallen, the cream of their civilizations cut down in the prime of their lives. The galaxy had been saved, but it was a galaxy in ruins, its once mighty empires reduced to ash and rubble. He took a long pull from his drink, the burn of the alcohol mirroring the pain of the memories. In that darkest hour, though, a flicker of hope emerged. The survivors of the strike force, human and alien alike, came together. We had shed blood together, watched our comrades die together. Now we would rebuild together. Kyle's eyes shone with a fierce light. We pooled our knowledge, our resources, our skills, human ingenuity combined with Koma strength, Zephyrian speed, and a dozen other unique talents. Side by side, we cleared the rubble, tended the wounded, and sowed the seeds of a new galactic order. His voice took on a tone of wonder, and in the process something incredible happened. The old hatreds, the ancient prejudices that had divided us for so long, began to crumble. We had seen the best and worst of each other, and in the end we found that we were not so different. The fires of war had forged a new unity, a sense of common purpose that transcended species and culture. Kyle leaned back in his chair, a smile playing at the corners of his mouth. It was a long road and not an easy one. There were setbacks, challenges, moments when it seemed the fragile peace would shatter, but we persevered, driven by the memory of those we had lost and the hope for a better future. His eyes met those of the Koma, his gaze unwavering. Gradually, painstakingly, the galaxy began to heal. New alliances were forged in the ashes of the old. New technologies emerged, born from the synthesis of human and alien ingenuity. New worlds were discovered and colonized, their riches shared for the benefit of all. Kyle's voice rang with quiet pride, and at the heart of it all were the humans, no longer the upstarts, the newcomers scrabbling for a place at the table. Now, we were the glue that held the galaxy together, the bridge between 100 different species and cultures. We had been tested in the crucible of war, and we had emerged stronger, wiser, and more united than ever before. He raised his glass, the amber liquid glowing in the light. Together we would face the challenges of the future. Together we would build a galaxy where the sacrifices of the fallen would never be forgotten, and where their dreams of peace and prosperity would finally be realized. The war had shown us the way, and now it fell to us to walk that path, no matter how long or hard the journey might be. The Komar raised their glasses in turn, their eyes shining with a newfound respect for the human before them. They had heard the tales of human courage and sacrifice, but to hear it from the lips of one who had been there, who had seen and endured so much. Kyle's eyes glistened with unshed tears as he spoke of the struggles faced by his fellow warriors in the aftermath of the war. The Komar listened intently, their faces etched with a mix of empathy and understanding. I remember one of my closest friends, a human named Jack, who had been with me since the beginning, Kyle said, his voice heavy with emotion. He was a hell of a soldier, fearless in the face of danger and always ready with a joke to lighten the mood. But when the war ended, it was like a part of him died with it. Kyle paused, taking a deep breath before continuing. I found him one night in a seedy bar on some backwater planet, drowning his sorrows in cheap liquor. His eyes were hollow, his face gaunt. He barely recognized me when I approached him. I tried to talk to him, to remind him of the good times we had shared, but it was like talking to a ghost. The Komar nodded solemnly, many of them having witnessed similar scenes among their own kind. What happened to him? One of them asked softly. Kyle shook his head. He disappeared not long after that. I heard rumors that he had taken up with a group of mercenaries, selling his skills to the highest bidder. It broke my heart to think of him like that, reduced to a gun for hire when he had once been a hero. He leaned forward, his eyes burning with intensity. That's when I knew I had to do something. I couldn't just sit back and watch as my friends, my brothers and sisters in arms, self-destructed. They had given everything for the galaxy, and now it was time for the galaxy to give back. Kyle's voice grew stronger as he described the early days of the Phoenix Project. We started small, just a handful of us reaching out to veterans in need. We offered them a place to stay, a chance to learn new skills, and most importantly, a sense of purpose. It wasn't easy, and there were times when I thought we would fail, but slowly word began to spread. He smiled then, a fierce pride shining in his eyes. Soon we had veterans from all over the galaxy coming to us, Komar and human and a dozen other species besides. They came broken and lost, but through hard work and dedication they began to heal. They learned to be farmers, mechanics, teachers, and 100 other things. They built new lives for themselves, and in doing so, they helped to rebuild the galaxy. Kyle's voice grew soft, almost reverent. And the most amazing thing, the bonds they forged in the Phoenix Project, the friendships they made, were just as strong as the ones they had formed in battle. They had a new family now, one that understood them in a way that no one else could. He looked around at the Komar, his eyes shining with gratitude. And it wasn't just the veterans who benefited. The skills they learned, the knowledge they gained, they brought back to their communities. They became leaders, advocates, and healers. They showed the galaxy that even in the darkest of times, there is always hope, always a chance for rebirth. Kyle fell silent then, his tale coming to an end. The Komar sat in stunned silence, their respect for the man before them deepening with each passing moment. They had known of the humans' bravery in battle, but to hear of their compassion, their dedication to their fellow warriors, even after the fighting had ended, it was truly humbling. The silence stretched on, each lost in their own thoughts, until finally one of the Komar raised his glass. To the Phoenix Project, he said, his voice ringing with admiration, and to the humans who showed us that even in the darkest of times, there is always hope. Kyle raised his own glass in turn, a small smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. The Komar sat in stunned silence as Kyle recounted the rise of Zarkos and his twisted vision for the galaxy. Hushed whispers rippled through the group as they struggled to reconcile the image of the Komar as noble warriors with the atrocities committed by the true Komar. Kyle's eyes hardened as he spoke of the attacks, his voice laced with a mix of anger and sorrow. They struck without warning or mercy. Human colonies burned, innocent lives snuffed out in an instant. The Phoenix Project scrambled to respond, but Zarkos was a cunning foe. He hit fast and faded away, leaving only chaos and grief in his wake. The Komar leaned forward, their scales gleaming in the dim light of the bar as they hung on Kyle's every word. "How did you stop them?" one asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Kyle's gaze grew distant, as if seeing the ghosts of the past. "We fought fire with fire. We used every trick in our arsenal, every scrap of intel we could gather. But it was never enough. Zarkos was always one step ahead, his network of spies and sympathizers reaching into the highest levels of power." He paused, his hand clenching into a fist. But there was one thing Zarkos hadn't counted on, the strength of the bonds we had forged. Human and Komar, we had shed blood together, and that created a loyalty that couldn't be broken. Talon was the embodiment of that bond. Kyle's voice grew heavy with emotion as he spoke of Orion's son. Talon had grown up in the shadow of his father's legacy, but he had become a legend in his own right, a warrior without equal, but also a diplomat, a bridge between our peoples. When he challenged Zarkos to single combat, it was more than just a duel, it was a symbol, a chance to prove that the old ways were not the only ways. The Komar leaned forward, their eyes wide with anticipation. "What happened?" one breathed. Kyle closed his eyes, the memory still raw. The battle was unlike anything I'd ever seen. Two titans locked in a dance of death. Talon fought with the strength of his father, but also with the wisdom of the years that had passed. Zarkos was a master of the old ways, his blade a blur of speed and precision. He opened his eyes, his gaze haunted. In the end, it was Talon who emerged victorious, but at a terrible cost. He had been wounded, mortally so. As he lay dying, he spoke of a vision for the future, a galaxy united not by fear, but by understanding. His last words were a call to action, a plea for us to continue the fight. Kyle's voice grew quiet, almost a whisper, and so we did. The true Komar, leaderless and demoralized, scattered to the winds, but the scars they left behind would take years to heal. For me, the loss of Talon was a blow that I would never fully recover from. He had been more than just a comrade in arms. He had been a friend, a brother. And as they left the bar that night, each lost in their own thoughts, they knew that the galaxy had been forever changed by the deeds of the humans and their allies. The road ahead would be long and hard, but with the memory of heroes like Talon to guide them, they would never lose hope. The fight for peace, for understanding, would go on no matter the cost. You have reached the end of the story. If you enjoyed this story and want to support us, please leave a like and subscribe to our channel, and for every comment that says 88, I will heart every single one of them. Thank you for your time.